Hey, it's Lynn, and today I'm coming at you with a book review of Ben Lerner's newest novel, Transcription, a slim, unsettling little book that I spent 2 hours buried inside. An unnamed narrator, 45, a writer, a father, travels by train to Providence, Rhode Island to conduct what will be the final published interview with his old college mentor, Thomas, a nonagenarian so mythologized in the worlds of art and technology that people describe him as speaking from the future and the past all at once. Before the narrator can even unpack, he drops his phone into the bathroom sink, destroying the only recording device he brought along. Rather than confess this to Thomas, a confession that would seem on its face almost weightless, he sets his dead phone on the table between them and pretends to press record. Thomas, impatient and already talking, never thinks to check. The novel's second movement relocates the reader to Madrid, where the narrator is asked to speak at a memorial symposium honoring Thomas, who has since died. Standing in front of an audience that trusted him to have preserved his mentor's final words faithfully, he admits what actually happened back in that Providence living room. There was, in fact, no recording. Everything he published, everything the literary world absorbed as testimony, had been reconstructed from memory alone. The confession lands less like a scandal and more like a slow motion unraveling of what we even mean when we call something documented. The final section, set in LA, abandons the narrator's voice almost entirely and hands the page to Max, Thomas's son, who spends most of it describing his own daughter Emmy's refusal to eat, a crisis the family manages only by letting her watch endless unboxing videos while she chews. Woven into that domestic unraveling is a story of Thomas's nearly fatal bout with COVID, the remote goodbye Max delivers over a failing hospital connection, and Thomas's unexpected, almost embarrassing recovery. It's only in the book's final pages that the truest shape of the story reveals itself, and I'll come back to that because it's the detail that made me close the book and just sit with it for a minute. What I truly enjoyed in this book is something very, very simple: the sentences. Lerner, who built his early career as a poet before he ever wrote fiction, treats every line like it has to earn its place. And at under 150 pages, Transcription reads like a book that's been trimmed rather than written. Every stray thought excised, every scene compressed until only the essential image remains. There's a moment early on where Thomas is described as someone who re-enchants the air simply by speaking. And that single phrase does more character work than pages of exposition could have managed. You can read this book in a single sitting, I certainly did, and yet it never feels thin so much as concentrated like a reduction sauce. All the flavor of a much longer novel boiled down to its very essence. The idea I keep thinking about, though, is the novel's obsession with what it means to record something and how differently that word has functioned across the decades. There's an old-fashioned, almost sacred version of recording embedded into this book: the tape recorder, the transcript, the physical device you trust to hold a voice in place after the person who made it is gone. And then there's the recording that we do now compulsively on our phones, which the novel treats with real suspicion. Emmy's unboxing videos, the FaceTime calls that glitch at the worst possible moment, the hospital iPad that fails Max exactly when he needs it most. Lerner seems to be asking whether our modern hunger to capture everything, to record everything, has actually made us worse at holding on to anything, and whether a toy being unwrapped on a screen can ever substitute for the person standing in front of you. That's a question with real teeth, especially for anyone who's caught themselves filming a moment instead of living inside of it. What elevates the book past a simple technology parable, though, is how thoroughly Lerner builds out its family tree. There's the narrator and his daughter Ava, who is refusing to go to school. There's Max and his daughter Emmy, who is refusing to eat anything. There's Max and his own father, Thomas. estranged but still somehow connected, and there's Thomas functioning almost as a surrogate father to the narrator himself, the mentor whose approval clearly means more to him than he's willing to admit outright. Even the grandfather granddaughter thread gets its due in the strange, tender intimacy between Thomas and Evie over the phone calls, not FaceTimes. Every one of these pairs mirrors the others just slightly off axis, and the effect feels like standing between two mirrors, watching the same anxious, loving, faltering father figure multiply into infinity. And yet, for as much as I admired what Lerner was doing at the prose level, I have to admit that the book gave me trouble in a way that had nothing to do with vocabulary or syntax. The writing itself is plain, almost conversational in places, but the timeline is anything but. Lerner slides between years, between speakers, between what's remembered and what's actually happening and or being said with almost no warning, and more than once I had to flip back a page just to reorient myself as to whose memory I was currently standing inside. And for a book this short, I found myself rereading passages more than I expected to, which is a strange kind of friction for a novel that otherwise moves so incredibly fast. Part of that disorientation, I think, is clearly intentional. Every voice in this book is, by design, an unreliable narrator. The narrator himself admits outright to fabricating an interview from memory. Thomas, his old age, drifts and misremembers his own memory, at one point confusing the narrator for his own son. Max's account of his father's final months is filtered so heavily through his anxiety about his daughter that it's hard to know where the reporting ends and the projection begins. I truly respect the ambition of that choice. It turns the entire novel into a mediation or a meditation on how memory distorts everyone who touches it. But as a reader, it also means you're never quite standing on solid ground, and there were stretches where I wanted just one voice I could fully trust to anchor me. Maybe that was just wishful thinking. There's also a certain remove to how Lerner handles his most wrenching material. Emmy's struggles with food, Thomas's hospitalization, the failed goodbye over a bad connection. These are hard, painful situations, but they're often described with the same cool observational precision Lerner uses to describe a collage hanging on Thomas's wall. That detachment is clearly a deliberate stylistic choice, and I understand the argument for it, but it kept me circling these characters' pain rather than sinking fully into it, and by the book's end, I felt more intellectually satisfied than emotionally moved. On top of that, the novel simply ends before several of its threads resolve in any conventional sense. We don't see how Ava's school refusal plays out, or whether Emmy's relationship to food ever eases, or what the narrator does with the guilt of his fabricated interview once it becomes public. I don't need a novel to tie a bow around everything, but the ending felt less like a deliberate open door and more like the tape simply ran out, which, given everything this book is about, recording, might be the most fitting critique I can offer, and also the reason that it left me particularly a little unsatisfied. Which brings me back to the detail I promised earlier. In that very first chapter, the narrator pretends to record Thomas, and Thomas never questions it. He was going along with a conversation he wrongly believes is being preserved. But by the novel's final pages, the situation inverts itself completely. It's revealed that Max, in one of his last real conversations with his father, actually did record him secretly without Thomas's knowledge or consent. The son who spent the whole book anxious about screens and recordings becomes the one who quietly, deliberately captures his father's voice for real, while the narrator who staged a recording that never existed is left to reconstruct his mentor from memory alone. Both men deceive Thomas in the exact same house, years apart, in exactly opposite directions, one faking presence, one hiding evidence, and Lerner lets that symmetry carry almost all the emotional weight of the ending. It's the kind of structural rhyme that retroactively turns that opening bathroom sink accident into the first cracked mirror that doesn't show its full shape until the very last page. All of which is to say that Transcription is a smart, tightly wound little book that rewards patience even when it tests it. As my introduction to Ben Lerner's fiction, I came away glad I'd spent an evening inside it, even if I didn't fall for it completely. And because of that, I am giving Transcription 4 out of 5 stars, a book that I thoroughly respected more than I loved, dense with ideas about memory, fatherhood, and the devices we trust to hold on to both, but one whose emotional distance and tangled timeline kept it from fully sweeping me away. And so that leads me to you. Have you read this book yet, and or are you planning to? I'd love to know your thoughts, so leave them down in the comment section below. I would love to interact with you. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome, stay awesome, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!